All right, everybody, welcome back to Philosophy for the People, joined by my now somewhat regular co-host, Mike Schramm. We're going to do a philosophical profile. We thought it would be interesting, and this was Mike's idea. Full credit to you, good sir.
Or blame.
Or blame. If this is an absolute train wreck, then you won't be seeing Mike anymore.
Oh, jeez. High stakes. Now I'm nervous.
Take my coat off. To just like highlight certain thinkers and, introduce you to their thought. Maybe give a little bit of personal background of why we like these guys or gals, how we got intrigued by them, and then give people stuff to read. I know people here are readers, should be readers. I hope you're not getting your only philosophical education from YouTube. But
if it's from your Substack, Pat, then you're not going to complain, right?
No. As long as you're, whatever you're doing is going to my direct financial benefit, I'm not going to mouth off too much. Yeah. So, right. All right. So who are we talking about today, Mike? Who's our philosophical profile?
I thought a really good start would be Mortimer Adler. And partially it's kind of inspired by, because, your YouTube channel is called Philosophy for the People. And if there wasn't a better, in the last 100 years, philosopher for the people, it probably would be him.
Yeah. Well, great pick. And you did pick this, but I think that I'm a fan, right? A fan of Adler.
Yeah. And you've mentioned him on the podcast too. So that's partially what made me want to pick him.
So this is exciting because I think if anybody here has not read Adler, if you're not familiar with Adler, stick around because he's a super. He is both a philosopher's philosopher, which is somebody that like professional philosophers, I think, should absolutely read, especially for his work on freedom of the will. This was a specialty of his, and philosophy of mind. He's got more academic work in those areas, but he's also an amazing popularizer. And by that, and we know there's often a difficulty when it comes to philosophy, right? Is that some works are just too academic. They're totally inaccessible to most people, most of the time. Even sometimes like professional philosophers have a hard time just because it's so specialized, right?
Yeah.
And there's a place for that, right? There's a place for that rigorous academic work. But then, there's popular works of philosophy and they're accessible, but they're just not very good. They're diluted. They're not nuanced. They don't kind of cover things in a certain amount of depth that as somebody who's really looking for a good philosophical case wants. I think Adler is the paradigm of somebody who perfectly hits that ideal blend of rigor and accessibility. In fact, I've said before that he was sort of the model for my book, The Best Argument for God. So when I was writing that book, I was reading a lot of Adler. Not necessarily for his arguments. I mean, a lot of his work I do reference some of his work in the book, but for his style, style and his tone, he was kind of the guy I was trying to most clearly, not hopefully steal from, but imitate in presentation, because he always struck me as somebody who hit that almost and I'm not even saying I hit it. I'm just saying that I tried, because I see him as the guy that was able to kind of hit that balance between rigor and accessibility, where if you're interested in ideas, he's going to give you just the amount of hand-holding you need, but he's not going to baby you. He's not going to be condescending, but he's going to help you, get through the pages and come out with a greater understanding of the
You're going to model your jump shot and your release after Steph Curry, not after Rudy Gobert. So it's like, sorry, I didn't mean to throw him under the bus. I'm a Timberwolves fan, so I had to go after my own. But anyway, like you said, it's the, that's the accessibility, right? And like I said, he's a philosopher for the people, which unfortunately gets thrown against him, by sometimes fellow professional philosophers and it's not even just he makes philosophy fun, or he makes philosophy, because it already is fun and interesting if you're interested in those ideas. It's more like you said, he the style is not only inviting, but it doesn't lack that clarity or that rigor as well.
Yeah.
And we're going to go through, you mentioned at the beginning that, we're going to give some reading material or some thoughts. And, I have some favorites of mine from Adler, because he wrote 50 books or something.
He was prolific. And not only that, but if you guys can get your hands on it, I have a number of these. He used to produce a Great Ideas newsletter. And these, like most people don't know about this, but these are just so rich. And they were just newsletters exploring the various philosophical ideas. I mean, he's really known for like the great ideas, right? Of saying like these are the great ideas in philosophical history. Let's explore them, right? And he'll tell you like what is the currency of philosophy? It is ideas. And trying to gain conceptual clarity around these great ideas, justice, freedom, equality, whatever the great, he's actually got a book called the six great ideas. So there's one book for you right there. But he's got a newsletter that expands on it so much that he produced for so many years, and it's just there's so much. He was absolutely prolific. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so and this is part of the one of what does he still have to contribute is the great books, great ideas, because the great books they're kind of having you could say a resurgence, or they're kind of booming right now. Like there's a lot of great books programs that are either just starting or becoming more and more popular. It's becoming a big topic online for like just people who maybe feel disillusioned by the traditional academic route, but they still want to learn. Our minds are still made to know, even if it's not in the kind of formal education setting. And so what better resource than these great books, these great ideas. And he not to introduce them obviously, but he was kind of the standard what would you say, like he was like the editor of these volumes that were coming out back in, what was it, the 70s, I think is when it was kind of
really he was hugely responsible. I forget, who else he was teamed up with. I feel like the University of Chicago or something. I forget. And I'm embarrassed to admit that a lot of there was a time when I probably could recite more of his biographical details, and it's probably worth at least stating a few. He lived a long life. He was born in 1902, and he lived to 98 years old. Mm-hmm. And he had a really interesting, personal philosophical and spiritual journey. He was kind of a secular man for a long time.
Yeah.
And then got very interested in classical pagan thought. And in fact, one of the first books that I ever read on natural theology was his book, How to Think About God.
It's in my
which we can talk about that more later. And then through the years, I forget exactly when he did convert to Christianity. Like maybe he became a Presbyterian or something. I forget.
It was Methodist. And
was it Methodist?
Yeah.
And go ahead. If I'm missing details, fill them in. Right. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Like you said, converts to Christianity, but doesn't make that. And we don't want to have this like triumphalistic attitude where it's like, oh, well, it only matters if you make that full leap into Catholicism. But I mean, that was ultimately, and a lot of his colleagues were saying he's already like super Catholic in his philosophy, not just because he is a respecter of Aristotelian and Thomistic thought, but like he's like defending, a lot of these, like people assumed he was Catholic already, or assumed he was a
because he was in the Thomistic circles. He was a huge, student of Thomas Aquinas, and we'll talk about his book 10 Philosophical Mistakes in a minute. But I don't know if you know this, Mike. He did convert to Catholicism in his 90s. And it was like deathbed. Just slid right in there, like the last couple of years of his life. And I don't know the details. Like I don't know what his initial holdups were. I don't know what eventually convinced him to become Catholic. I really don't know. I just know that he did enter the Catholic Church, a few years before his death in his 90s. So it's just really cool. It's a really long, fascinating journey that you can trace. You can kind of, I think, sort of glean insights into, what he was personally going through as you kind of read the course of his work, right? I mean, clearly
when he did write an autobiography too, actually. I
have not read that one. Yeah.
And it wouldn't get to, obviously, because like you said, it was basically a deathbed, or like very near the end of his life, where he becomes Catholic. So that wouldn't be included in the autobiography part, but you would get a little bit of the, and again, you can just scan through the Wikipedia page and you can see a lot of these things are covered too, in terms of his openness to, like you said, theism at first. And like you said, it's even like a classical pagan version of God, which he kind of has slowly, incrementally started to see the relationship between that and, how Christians understand God, and specifically within the Catholic philosophical understanding too.
Yeah. So let's rewind the tape, because there's one book that everybody should start with by Adler. Actually, there's a couple books, but this is the one I want to emphasize first. I've mentioned it before. I have an episode on this, or a short video called How to Read a Book.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first book that I ever read from Adler.
Okay.
And it's a really, have you read this one, Mike?
I have, yeah.
And it's a phenomenal book because it's really a disguised text of classical Aristotelian logic. Like, if you understand, like, it's really the 3 acts of the mind applied to critical reading. It's brilliant. And if you are just somebody who wants to learn how to go from a state of understanding less to understanding more, how to be a more effective and efficient reader, this book is, I don't, to use the cliched term, it's game changing. So I think this is foundational. I think every human being should read this book. I think it should be assigned in every middle school. Frankly, it's not that technical. It's not that hard. And not only that, but at the end of the book, you will have your list of great books. So, like, that book will teach you how to read, and then it will give you all the things that you should read. So it is just like such a great book. His style's amazing. He there was a co-author for that book. I forget who the co-author was. It was one of his, but they revised it and expanded it throughout the years. And it was his best-selling book, from what I remember. It's a classic. It's a classic book. And I forget how I even stumbled upon it. When I
have a little bit of a story. So of how I came across. So it was actually, my undergrad is in elementary ed. And so I was interviewing after college for a bunch of elementary ed jobs. And one of the schools that I was interviewing for was a classical school. And they actually, in the interview, were saying, like, well, this is part of our educational philosophy, is that we require all the teachers to read how to read a book. And this is whether you're a first grade teacher or, they go all the way up to 12th grade. And so they're saying, like, this is foundational for, like you said, how our teachers think, because that's what's going to instill in the students how they think. And like you said, it lays out the acts of the mind. And so even though it's called How to Read a Book, which is still the best application of the principles, it can be applied to, any, like, whenever you're investigating any sort of intellectual endeavor, right? So I jokingly refer at the end of, when I'm getting our little outline ready for the show, I said, like, you could call it How to Watch a TikTok Video, and it would, the principles would still apply. I'm not recommending you do that, but it's one of those where it's like, nothing is off limits to the mind that really seeks to know. And so it's like, even though, like I said, the best application is still how to read a book, because that's how the ideas are going to be presented the most thoughtfully, or with the most depth.
Yes.
You can still take that approach to anything.
And even though there's a lot of good principles in the book, there's a lot of practicality too, like just advice you can use right away. I remember something that was important to me when I first read it was like, hey, if you're reading a really technical book and it's currently above you, which you should be, right? Because this is like resistance training. You're not going to get to that state of greater understanding unless you are reading stuff that really challenges you, that you aren't able to just automatically assimilate immediately, right? One of the pieces of advice he has, and this is something I always try to pass along now, is just keep going. Read it fast. Don't worry about getting everything at once. Just get through the whole thing, get as much as you can on the first pass. And then when you go back, that's where you're going to do all your underlining, highlighting, questioning, wrestling with the text, all these other techniques that he gives you to try and, reach that next level of understanding. But for him, it's really important that when you're engaging with the text that is above you, which is what you should often be doing, is that you don't stop, you don't slow down, you try to get through the whole thing as quickly as possible. Don't be intimidated by it. Just accept you're not going to get all of it at first, but to build that sort of critical momentum that you then need to really make the wider project of absorption.
Imagine having a baseline that you're going to read a book twice. Like, that's got to be a almost a conversion of sorts that has to happen in a person, where it's like they're already assuming, oh, on my next reading of the book,
Yeah, I mean, and like, he's huge on this, right? I mean, like, twice at a minimum. And Adler emphasizes, especially for the great books, there's a clip of him somewhere where he's talking about Aristotle's Ethics. He's like, I don't know where he came up with this number, but he's like, at least 12 times, and not all in the same year, right? But throughout the years at different stages of your life, right? There's
a C.S. Lewis quote where he's like, if a book isn't worth multiple rereadings, and he was talking about fiction at the time, but you could apply this to any book, then it really isn't even worth reading once.
It's not worth one. Yeah.
I mean, so it's like, if you don't have this, and not that everybody always has the time and the possibility to read every single book more than once, but you kind of know, oh, this is one, like you said, when I feel things starting to go over my head, or I feel things where this is really a struggle, then that's maybe your indication of this is one of those that has to be revisited.
Yeah.
And that's what makes, the How to Read a Book, one of the things that makes it so helpful.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So that's the first one I wanted to throw out. Can I throw out another one
Yeah.
that I think people should start with? This I often recommend when people say, hey, Pat, I want to get started with philosophy. I don't know where to begin. I often throw this book out, 10 Philosophical Mistakes. And the reason I like this book is it's sort of a condensed, but not totally inaccurate history of the great philosophical ideas. And what he's doing in 10 Philosophical Mistakes is he's identifying exactly that, places in the history of philosophical thought where he thinks there was a little error in the beginning that was multiplied 1,000 times, later on. Aristotle's famous quote. So he loves to pick on, Locke and Kant and these guys, right? Now, whether you ultimately agree with his assessments, I think it's a great introduction to a couple things. One, the sorts of things philosophers are concerned about or worried about. Things like human consciousness, contingency, the idea of freedom, the moral dimension, right? He covers sort of all the really important territory in the history of philosophy. And he tries to identify where a mistake was made concerning some particular puzzle or question, right? Say the hard problem of consciousness or whatever. And his solution is always the same. It's just go back to Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas, right? He's like rather than try and build on, this error that that Descartes made or Kant made, we should go back to a prior paradigm that had the theoretical resources to resolve these.
You have to turn around and go back. It's like
so that's the theme of his book. Now, again, everybody should assess his assessment for themselves. And this is something Adler would himself insist upon. But just as a general introduction to the history of philosophical thought and the types of ideas that philosophers play with and why they're important, it's a great book. Can't recommend it highly
enough. He'll ruin you for modern philosophy, though. I remember, and we both went to the same grad school for philosophy, and you have to take modern philosophy as one of the gen eds or the core courses. And I remember having these thoughts as we're trying to go through these, and I was like, man, it's like, and this sounds really, I don't know, it sounds almost arrogant, but again, it's not because I'm so smart or my ideas are so good. It's because you start with, the best of the best when you go from Plato to Aristotle, and then, just jumping all the way to Aquinas, which is what our program focused on so much. And you think like, how did anybody move away from that to this? Like, how do you get sucked in, And so, and it reminds me of, you were talking about how in the kind of modern and then contemporary where it's so varied and so it's the minutia is just so varied in terms of philosophical questions and ideas. And it reminds me of so Dr. Peter Kraft, who I think would be another good profile maybe down the line for a philosophical profile. He compares the history of philosophy to a tree, where it's like you have these somewhat kind of different this variation at the beginning in terms of the pre-Socratics as the roots, and then they come together in this unity during especially the medieval era. But then after you get, past Aquinas and or past Descartes, then it starts to really go all over the place, like the leaves and the branches as the tree gets up bigger. And it kind of reminds me of, when you really want to see like, well, this kind of modern philosophical idea seems kind of to be in error. It doesn't seem to explain things correctly. It's like you have to go back to where that error started, where it came from, right? To the source. And where is the kind of unity that kind of brought a lot of these philosophical ideas together, and then what led to the divergence? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it will make more sense if people read the book. So he's looking at mistakes that were made with respect to how the mind relates to the world, to the idea of freedom. So there's a great chapter in there, and you'll quickly see why this was his area of specialization in freedom and determinism. He gets into political philosophy quite a bit. So it's a great book, and I highly recommend it. So everyone should get it. I do want to say I'm not as like hostile towards modern philosophy as maybe Adler was, or a lot of people are. I think there's a lot of good that could be had there, but I do think that there are seriously mistaken assumptions, of which Adler, I think, accurately points out a number of them. Yeah.
Well, and I think, because to the degree so there's this phrase that kind of people relate back to Vatican II when it comes to theology, to the return to the sources sort of idea, where it's like you have these kind of new movements in terms of whether it's psychological movements or philosophical movements or just like cultural movements, and how is the church supposed to kind of grapple with these or make sense of them. And it's always a returning back to the sources, which to the fathers of the council, they meant, the scriptures, but also the church fathers. And what principles did they put down that would help us engage with some of these new, maybe unfamiliar ideas? And I think when it comes to modern and contemporary philosophy, I'm not totally hostile to them either, right? And not just because, it's not like it's only if they're neo-Thomists, not only if they, basically do the same thing as, like, that's not even what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a lot of a lot of good that can be recognized or can maybe be applied when you have this sort of like returning back to the sources when it comes to, classical philosophy as well.
Yeah.
And,
good.
And so, but yeah, anyway.
All right. So I've hogged the mic. I've given 2 books. What do you got? What do you got for us, Mike?
Well, yeah. So you mentioned one already, which it's still probably my favorite. So I was saying before in my how I kind of came to know Adler was from that interview, which just to finish the story, I didn't actually take the job. I took a different job. So I didn't have to read it, but I did end up reading How to Read a Book later. So I read it on my own. It wasn't because I had to. But the one that still stands out, and I think I actually read this one first. So I came across, even though I was first exposed to Adler, like I said in that interview, How to Think About God, which you mentioned earlier. And I can't remember the subtitle. It's something by a modern pagan or something.
Yeah, something like a pagan approach to God or something like that. Right? Yeah.
And really, it's not even because it's in the title. He's not trying to argue for the existence of God. He actually has another book that covers that. It's more.
Well, he does. He offers an argument in that book,
but it's more the idea of because, like you said, his specialty was more in philosophy of mind, and he does a lot of epistemology stuff. And his questions that he's talking about is, but you can't see God as just another thing in the universe, or your argument about God or your belief in God can't be seen in the same way as your opinion about your favorite flavor of ice cream, right? And that's kind of the big, I think, contribution of How to Think About God, more so than he really explains Aristotle's way of motion or something like that. That's at least.
Yeah, right? So I mean, he does do like some he does do some conceptual medicine, right, if you will, on like what do we mean by God and how God answers to a definite description, stuff like that. But he does offer an argument, right? So he develops a sort of broad modal well, it's not a modal argument, but it's a contingency argument based off of a sort of modal intuition. I actually don't think it's the best argument, to be frank. And I think he actually makes some mistakes when he's talking about Aquinas and Aristotle. We don't have serious ones. I think he's just seriously and demonstrably mistaken at various points in that book. I don't know if he held those positions later on in life, but I like the book very much, and I recommend it very much. There's lots of books that I disagree with that I recommend very much. And I think a lot of the sort of conceptual help he does give with respect to, okay, what is God? What are the basic motivations the philosopher had for thinking about God is exceptionally helpful and useful. And at the time when I read the book, like I said, it was one of the first, it was only many years later I realized, okay, there's some things in this book that are definitely wrong. But when I first read it, man, it captivated me. I'm like, this is really cool and interesting stuff.
It is a really good antidote if you've been inundated with the kind of new atheist, which we grew up around the same time, where that was a big thing when we would have been in high school, or high school, kind of starting off in college. And that's where I think the best contribution of that book is like I said, it contradicts for one, it doesn't relativize the question, which at least I kind of remember growing up and being so used to is, well, just because we have different beliefs about God or whether God exists or not, well, just be a good person or be a nice person. And he kind of shows like, but your belief about God affects your belief about everything. That's kind of what makes God God. And if your belief about God, whether you believe in God or not, doesn't affect other things, then it's not really God that you're even talking about. And I think that's kind of, like I said, it's more it's going against the relativized understanding of the question, but also saying like, no, this is an objective truth claim, not just a opinion kind of claim too.
Yeah, that relates to his. We mentioned. We might as well just mention again his 6th grade ideas book. Truth, goodness, beauty, freedom, justice, equality. I think that those are the 6 ideas he treats in that
justice,
book. Right?
liberty, and equality. Yeah,
Justice, liberty, and equality.
I was going through it in preparation for this. I was just reading it
Not a bad memory Dad has here. It's been a minute since I picked that book. That's what I got 5 out of 6 there, and freedom, liberty. I guess we can give me credit on that one. But right, yeah, he's super hostile to relativism and skepticism, and he's got some really good treatments against those in that book in particular. The chapters on goodness and beauty are really fascinating too. The whole book is fascinating. So I would actually go, if people are going to do like the Adler deep dive, go 10 philosophical mistakes and then immediately into the 6th grade ideas. But for sure, make How to Read a Book your baseline. How to Think About God, if you're interested just in his thoughts on natural theology, that kind of hangs out there by itself. It's a good book, but I would definitely recommend the others first. If you want a different book on natural theology, The Best Argument for God.
The Best Argument. Yeah. we won't go so far as to say the best, book on natural theology.
Oh, who wouldn't go that far? I don't know, man.
Yeah. All right. Well.
All right. What else for Adler, Mike? There's so much. We gotta, we can't cover everything, of course, but if nothing else, hopefully we've invited people to give this guy a shot.
Yeah. So I guess the last little, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if there was a question, of how can Adler's ideas, or what can he still contribute today? So we talked about, he's a philosopher for the people. He is trying to make big philosophical ideas accessible, especially the ones that I think resonate with people the most, whether it's not just whether God exists or not, but does God actually matter? Can I know things for real, right? Can I actually know true things? And like you mentioned, there's even some kind of downstream things about political philosophy. 3 of those 6 ideas are justice, liberty, and equality, which obviously have political implications. So I guess, and we'll both kind of talk about this, but like, what are the areas where he can still contribute?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things that Adler brings to the table aside from actually his brilliant communication of complex ideas. One is just how to have productive discourse. He's really insistent upon people being able to say, before you say I agree or disagree, that you can confidently say that I understand, right? So he demands patient, careful attention to the evaluation and study of ideas, especially ideas that you're initially hostile to. I think his just general philosophical spirit, again, is just a wonderful model for people. He's a model of mine in many ways. I think he sort of embodies the true spirit of philosophy, if you will. His command, I think his ability to communicate ideas accessibly actually just shows a true mastery of the material on his end. I think it is actually, sometimes people think if somebody's writing simply or clearly, they're a simpleton. I think it's the opposite when it comes to people like Adler. I think it's because he's actually quite brilliant and has a true mastery of this stuff that he's able to communicate it so particularly well. We didn't even mention his philosophy of education. He's actually got a bunch on philosophy of education, which I haven't read as much of because that's just not an area that I.
Yeah, it's Paideia and that sort of thing. So.
He's got stuff on the angels. He's got philosophical argument for the angels. So he's got something in angelology, immaterial of the intellect.
Aristotle for everybody.
That's another one. So bringing Aristotle back into the picture. I think, what does he have to contribute? I think it's just everything that he already has contributed and just encouraging people to rediscover it. How to be a better reader, how to speak well and how to think well, how to speak and how to listen is another one of his books.
That's right.
It's excellent and super practically effective. So if you want just a book on being more persuasive, being a better communicator, being a better listener, I mean, the dude is insanely practical. Like if you want, he's got a newsletter on how to be a better salesperson, right? And he draws on Aristotle for that as well, because he talks about how he had to sell the Great Books program and get funding and all this or that. So if you want like a philosopher that does not just live in the clouds, but will give you real practical skills for all areas of life. I mean, Adler is your dude. You'll learn abstract concepts for sure, but the stuff he's going to give you, I think, will genuinely be able to play out in your life in all sorts of unexpected and very positive ways. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you've talked about on philosophy for the people before, this idea of generalist, right? Where it's like you're interested in everything. You want to, in a sense, participate more fully in life by, becoming even if it's not an expert, even if it's not a master, and we're not going to be able to devote 10,000 hours to everything, but we can, in a sense, experience more when we are more intentional, right, about the things that we're doing or the things that we're even watching or thinking about. I made the joke before of, Adler's next book should be How to Watch a TikTok, because like you can still call the like there's still intellectual fruit that can be harvested from even modern media, like, and maybe TikToks and Vines are too insipid or too short or whatever, but even like people using movies and TV shows as basically like substitutes for literature, because you're telling stories, it's being, it's captivating the senses, but there are ideas that are being presented. And so it's like, even if you want to just like participate more fully in the media that you're experiencing, and you're experiencing it whether you like it or not. And so it's like cultivating those habits of the mind, like you said, it's going to make life more fruitful, more fulfilling. And I think, like I said, the idea of, the generalist idea where it's like, I can have a hand in everything and experience it more, is going to, like I said, make your life better.
Yeah, good. I know your bell is about to ring, Mike. So I think your school bell. So this is probably a good one to wrap this up. So yeah, Adler is a philosopher, not one philosopher that everybody should read. And I think he's also a guy to have ready to recommend to other people who are interested in philosophy. Like he is the I would gladly hand, some of his books like Aristotle for Everyone or 10 Philosophical Mistakes to anybody who's looking to get into philosophy, to kind of catch the bug, if you will, by giving them something that is that has real depth, but is not super intimidating. It's a great sort of initial launch pad, invitation, if you will. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. I would love to hear what everyone else thinks, and if in the comments, if you guys have read Adler, what do you think? Do you like this guy? What books or articles have you read of his? What do you think that he has to contribute? Join the conversation in the comments below. Mike, it's been a pleasure, my man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Talk to you later.
See you guys.